My name is Sarah. I'm 25, and I never thought I'd find something that made me feel alive the way this job did. It wasn't just about money or security or even climbing the ladder. I had found something deeper, something that gave my life a strange kind of rhythm. I found purpose where I least expected, and it felt like home. It started quietly. I was hired as an assistant, nothing glamorous, just paperwork, schedules, and coffee runs. But the moment I stepped into that office, I felt something shift. The walls weren't just walls. The air carried a strange warmth, like it had been waiting to wrap itself around me. There were desks, computers, deadlines, and stress, but beneath it all was a feeling I couldn't quite name. Familiar, safe, like I'd been missing something all along and didn't even know it until I walked into that building. I remember the first week. I barely spoke. I was too focused, too nervous to make mistakes. But I watched. I observed how the team moved, how they handled pressure, how they laughed during breaks like the world outside didn't exist. There was a softness there under all the professional polish, and I wanted to belong to it. I wanted to matter in a space that had somehow made room for me. It didn't take long for me to grow into it. Slowly, I started to smile more, speak up during meetings, bring ideas to the table. It was like the office itself was drawing me out, peeling back my layers without asking for permission, and I let it. I wanted to be seen, to be valued, not just for my efficiency, but for who I was underneath the title. And I felt that I was. There was something about the way mornings began. I used to dread them, but here I found myself waking up early, picking out what to wear like it mattered, brushing my hair like someone might notice, adding a little color to my lips even though no one had ever asked for it. But it wasn't about vanity. It was about presence. I wanted to show up fully, completely. I wanted to be someone who made the air a little softer for others too. I never said it out loud, but I started to care more than I should have. Not just about the work or the way I felt when I was thanked for staying late, but about the energy that lived between glances, about the way I felt when someone walked past my desk and I suddenly forgot what I was typing, about the way my chest would tighten when my name was called in a tone that meant more than instruction. I didn't know what to call it back then. It wasn't love, not in the obvious sense, but it was something sacred, something delicate. It was devotion, maybe, a longing to protect what I had found, to keep it from being broken. It felt personal, even when it wasn't. It felt like I had been chosen, not just hired, and that changed everything. Lunch breaks turned into moments I waited for, not for the food, but for the silences, the small talk, the eye contact that lingered just a second too long. No one else seemed to notice it, but I did. I felt it pulse beneath every casual interaction, and it made me feel both brave and terrified at the same time. I started to dream differently, not of houses or weddings or fame, but of moments that existed only in spaces like that office, under lights that hummed gently, between people who said very little but meant too much. Some nights I stayed late not because I had to, but because I couldn't leave. Because walking out meant breaking the spell, and I wasn't ready to let go of something I hadn't even held yet. There's something cruel about falling in love with your own life only to realize you don't fully own it. Like someone could walk in and take it all away while you're still memorizing the feeling of belonging. But in those early days, none of that fear existed. Only the warmth, only the quiet certainty that I was finally where I was supposed to be. Every hallway felt like a heartbeat, every shared laugh like a secret, and even though no one had promised me forever, I had already started to build my future around it. I didn't know it then, but I was falling for something I could never keep. Every morning became a reason to dress my heart in hope, Before that job, mornings felt like an ache I carried in silence, the kind of ache that didn't cry out but sat heavily in the chest, making everything feel like effort. I used to pull myself out of bed like it was a punishment, just going through the motions, chasing things I didn't care about, wearing clothes that didn't feel like mine, moving through days that felt borrowed. But everything changed when I started waking up with purpose. I didn't realize it at first. It began subtly. One morning, I took a little extra time picking my outfit, not because it was required, but because it mattered to me. I began to care about the way I walked into that building, not for approval, but because I finally felt like I was stepping into something that gave me life. My mornings became sacred. The mirror wasn't just glass anymore. It was the place I reminded myself I was becoming. Becoming someone who belonged, someone who was trusted, someone whose ideas meant something. Even the coffee I made tasted different, warmer somehow, like it was preparing me for something beautiful I hadn't yet named. Hope is a quiet thing. It doesn't shout. It hums softly in the background, drawing your hand toward your favorite blouse, urging you to tie your hair just right, helping you pick out the lipstick that made you feel a little more fearless, even if no one noticed. But someone did. I don't know how I knew it, but I did. There was a stillness in the way certain glances held me, like they saw something I was still trying to see in myself. I started smiling more at my reflection. Not because I looked perfect, but because I was finally stepping into a day I wanted to live. The small things became rituals. Choosing earrings that matched my mood, a spritz of perfume that made me feel remembered even when I was alone. And none of it was for show. It was for presence, for meaning, for the way I felt when I walked through those glass doors and everything inside me whispered, "You're becoming who you're meant to be." Some mornings, I'd pause right before stepping in. I'd breathe deeply, letting the cool air fill my lungs, grounding myself in the feeling that I was wanted there, not in a loud, dramatic way, but in the way rooms silently open for people who carry quiet purpose. It was as if the building itself knew me now, my footsteps, my heartbeat, the way I leaned on my desk just a little too long when I was thinking. I had become part of something, and I clung to that with reverence. Hope doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it lives in soft habits, the way I looked forward to hearing good mornings in voices that made the room feel warmer, the way I caught myself humming while organizing papers, the way I waited for certain footsteps, a certain knock, a familiar voice that somehow made my name feel lighter. And even though we didn't speak much outside of work, there was something about the way mornings unfolded between us. Unspoken, but unmistakable. There was a rhythm, a pattern. I'd feel it when our eyes met across the hallway, or when a brief nod felt like the start of 1,000 conversations that would never be spoken aloud. I dressed not to impress, but because it made me feel like I was part of something sacred, something delicate, something that made even the silence feel full. I used to think hope was something loud, something you chased, something you had to fight to feel. But this was different. This hope was born of routine, of anticipation, of the steady beat of showing up, of being seen, even if no one said it out loud. It was found in the knowing smiles, the almost accidental brushes of hands when papers were passed, the rare but unforgettable moments when kindness lingered a little longer than necessary. Every morning became a promise I made to myself to carry hope in the way I walked, to wear my heart gently but visibly, to give the best of myself to a world that had finally made space for it. I didn't know where it would lead or how long it would last, but I knew it mattered. And in those mornings, that was enough, because sometimes getting ready for the day isn't about clothes or makeup. Sometimes it's about preparing your heart for a world that might just notice it. The office wasn't just work. It was where my soul started to breathe. Before that, I had known only survival, the kind of routine that dulls your spirit, that turns your days into copy-pasted hours filled with noise but no meaning. I thought that was all life would ever be, moving forward because you had to, showing up because it was expected, putting on a smile that didn't quite reach your eyes. I didn't know that a place could change you from the inside out without asking for permission. But this one did. It wasn't the walls or the furniture. It wasn't the salary or the desk with my name on it. It was something in the air. Something I could feel in the way people moved, in the way the morning light fell across the floor, in the way voices blended in quiet harmony. There was life in those walls, real, breathing, vibrant life, and somehow it started waking something inside me I thought had died. At first, I couldn't explain it. I just felt lighter, like every time I walked through those glass doors, I was shedding something. Fear, doubt, the loneliness I carried with me like a second skin. Here, I wasn't just another girl with a clipboard and a title. I was a presence. I was part of a rhythm, a story, a hum that moved through the hallways and settled in the corners of rooms no one paid attention to, but I did. I started listening more, not just to the conversations or the meetings, but to the spaces between them, the way someone's laugh softened a tense room, the way shoulders relaxed after a simple thank you, the way eyes met and held, sometimes just a little too long, like they were saying more than they could speak. It was in those moments that I began to realize I wasn't just working, I was living. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to disappear to be accepted. I could speak and be heard. I could be quiet and still belong. My thoughts weren't just written down for formality. They were read, considered, sometimes even praised, and the way that made me feel. It was more than validation. It was breath. It was like someone had cracked a window open in a room that had been sealed shut for years. I remember sitting at my desk one afternoon, sunlight pouring in through the blinds, the soft hum of conversation in the background, and feeling completely, strangely at peace. I wasn't waiting for the day to end. I wasn't checking the clock. I wasn't shrinking. I was fully there, and in that moment I knew this wasn't just a job. This was oxygen. There's something holy about finding a place where you feel safe to unfold, where you no longer have to tuck your heart behind your ambition, where you're allowed to feel things, even the complicated ones, without being told to toughen up or move on. And for me, that place had an address, a keycard, a corner where I kept my coffee mug, and a drawer full of pens I never used but couldn't throw away. And yes, there was someone, unnamed, unclaimed, unspoken. But their presence lived in every part of that space, in the air I breathed, in the way I straightened my posture when I heard footsteps approaching, in the way I felt suddenly aware of myself when our paths crossed. They never said anything that broke the rules, never did anything inappropriate or even remotely suggestive, but there was a weight to the silence between us, a hum, a warmth, a knowing. It made everything feel deeper. My work, my routine, my connection to that place, I started putting more of myself into everything I did, hoping, though I'd never admit it, that it would be noticed, that it would be felt. Not for praise or reward, but because when your soul starts breathing, you want someone to see it rise and fall. I began to look forward to the most ordinary things, passing notes during meetings, walking past each other in the hallway, shared glances that lasted just long enough to be real. These weren't fantasies, they were echoes, moments that felt sacred because they belonged only to us, even if no one knew. That office became the quiet center of my life, the place where I remembered who I was and who I could become. The place where I gave more than was required, stayed longer than expected, and hoped harder than I should have. I didn't need a declaration. I didn't need a confession. I just needed to breathe, and I did. Because in that space, with its ordinary windows and silent magic, I had finally found a reason to stay. Unspoken glances meant more than promotions ever could. I used to believe that success came in numbers, in recognition, titles, bonuses. That if I worked hard enough, stayed late enough, and said all the right things in meetings, I'd move up, I'd be seen, I'd matter. And I did all those things. But the strange thing is, none of it ever made me feel the way a single glance across the room did. That quiet, fragile moment when no words were exchanged, but something in me stirred like it had been waiting to be noticed for a very long time. There was no roadmap for what I was feeling. It didn't fit into job descriptions or career plans. It didn't come with applause or announcements. It was subtle, so subtle I sometimes wondered if I was imagining it. But the way it made my heart pause, the way it shifted something behind my ribs, it was real. Every time our eyes met without meaning to, something passed between us, something small but powerful, like a secret that didn't need to be spoken to be understood. I wasn't foolish enough to think anything would happen. That wasn't the point. It was never about chasing something. It was about the way it made me feel seen, fully, quietly, unmistakably seen. In a world that moved so fast, that demanded loud victories and constant movement, those glances reminded me of something still, something sacred. They made me want to be softer, more present, more open, even if only to myself. I remember the way my breath would catch, just for a second, when I felt it coming. Not every day, not always, but just often enough to make the hours in between shimmer with anticipation. They weren't flirty or dramatic. They weren't anything anyone else would notice, but they were everything to me, a moment of connection that said, without a word, I see you, I feel it too. And maybe they didn't mean what I thought they did. Maybe I was alone in it, but even then I cherished them, because those moments brought something alive in me. They made the work mean more. They made the space feel less like a job and more like a chapter I didn't want to end. I started to give more of myself, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I wanted to be worthy of the presence I was in, even if no one ever named it. It's strange, the things that become significant. A shared smile in the break room, the way our eyes would meet when we passed each other in the hallway, the brief pause before speaking, as if holding something unspoken. No promotion ever gave me that kind of weight in my chest. No raise ever made my hands tremble the way they did after those rare, quiet encounters. I began to time my breaks without realizing it, aligning them with the rhythm of the day in hopes our paths would cross. I'd linger near the coffee machine, not because I needed caffeine, but because I wanted to exist a little longer in the space where something might happen, where the silence between us might stretch into meaning. There was something beautiful in the restraint, in the way neither of us ever crossed a line, and yet so much was said in the spaces between what was allowed. It was the closest thing I'd ever felt to intimacy in a place where nothing romantic could unfold. But emotion doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't wait for the right setting. It blooms wherever it finds light, even if that light only lasts a few seconds at a time. Those glances stayed with me, long after the meetings ended, long after the lights were turned off and the doors were locked. I'd sit alone at my desk some evenings, heart full and aching at the same time, wondering how something so small could make me feel so much. I wasn't chasing a love story. I was simply holding onto the only thing in my world that felt real in a way nothing else did. When promotions were handed out and names were called, I smiled and clapped with the others. I was happy, genuinely, for the people who got them. But inside, I was still clinging to something quieter, something no one could see. And in my own quiet way, I had received something even more valuable, a feeling I couldn't explain, a connection I couldn't deny, and a truth that lived somewhere just behind my eyes whenever I looked up and found his already there. Because in those unspoken glances, I found more meaning than any title ever could. Loyalty was my love language. Until silence answered it, I gave myself fully to the life I was building there. Not in the loud, dramatic way people often talk about giving their all, but in the quiet, everyday choices that spoke without needing to be announced, staying late when no one asked, double, checking things even when I wasn't told to, protecting the peace of others, shielding mistakes, celebrating their wins louder than my own. It wasn't just a job, it was where I poured the best parts of myself, because for me, love never had to be romantic to be real. My loyalty was how I loved. It wasn't something I ever asked to be seen. I didn't need credit or attention. I just needed to feel like it mattered. That who I was beneath the performance. The girl who cared too much, who stayed longer, who paid attention to the little things, was noticed in some small, unspoken way. And for a while, I truly believed it was. The atmosphere made it easy to invest, the warmth, the rhythm, the sense of belonging that wrapped itself around me so naturally, I barely noticed how deep I was sinking. Every glance, every moment of shared silence, every lingering pause, it made me feel like I was building something sacred. Maybe not with words, maybe not with plans, but with presence, with trust, with loyalty. And so I gave, day after day, in every task, in every detail, in every time I put someone else first. My heart was woven into it all. I didn't just want to do well, I wanted to nurture what we had, not just the structure of the team, but the energy that moved between us, the invisible thread I felt connecting me to something more than duty, something that looked a little too much like devotion. But silence has a way of creeping in. It didn't come all at once. At first, it was just a missed glance, a day when my questions were answered with clipped responses. A shift in energy I tried not to name. I told myself it was stress, exhaustion, a bad day, but when the pattern held, when the silence settled and made a home where warmth used to live, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I had offered everything in the language I knew, presence, consistency, care, and what came back was absence, stillness, closed doors and quiet rooms that once held echoes of something beautiful. I kept showing up, hoping, waiting, believing it would soften again, that maybe it wasn't as personal as it felt, that maybe the connection I thought existed hadn't truly faded. But each time I tried to reach, it was like the space grew colder. And yet I stayed. That's the thing about loyalty. It doesn't need reward. It clings to what it once believed in, long after the evidence disappears. I would catch myself remembering the way things used to feel, the comfort in the small things, the steadiness of a presence that once seemed so certain. I would stare at my screen, fingers frozen above the keyboard, wondering when I had become invisible, not in action. I was still doing everything, still performing, still showing up, but in spirit. It felt like I had disappeared in the one place I had found myself. Some nights, I'd sit at my desk long after everyone had left, the hum of the lights above the only sound in the room. I'd look around and ask myself what I was really holding on to. Was it the role, the dream, or just the memory of how it used to feel before the silence replaced the softness? I didn't want much, just a sign that what I gave meant something, that the care, the time, the loyalty, that it reached someone, that it stayed. But the longer the silence stretched, the louder it became. It started saying things no one would say out loud, that maybe I wasn't needed the way I thought I was, that maybe I had built a home in someone else's hallway, that maybe the glances I remembered were only meaningful because I gave them meaning. Still, I stayed longer than I should have, because when loyalty is your love language, you don't leave when it gets hard. You stay, you believe, You fight quietly for what used to feel right. But love in silence is a war with yourself, and I was losing pieces of me trying to keep something alive that had already gone quiet. I never got the words I waited for, never got the closure or even the acknowledgement. Just silence, a silence so heavy it told me everything. I didn't just lose a job, I lost where my heart used to live. People think losing a job is just about the paycheck or the routine. They assume it's the stress of change, the uncertainty of what comes next. And yes, all of that is real, but what no one really prepares you for is when the loss isn't just professional, when it's personal, when the place you walked into every morning didn't just give you tasks or deadlines, but a reason to wake up feeling like you belonged somewhere. I didn't just go to work. I arrived, fully, honestly. I gave that place parts of myself that even I hadn't known were waiting to be found. The laughter in meetings, the quiet kindness in moments between work, the way the air felt warmer when I walked through the glass doors. It wasn't the walls or the desks or the projects that held me. It was the heartbeat of something I can't quite name, something that made me feel safe and understood without asking for it. And maybe I was foolish. Maybe I let myself believe it was mine, that the energy, the connection, the purpose, it would last, that it wasn't just a phase or a chapter, but a foundation I could build around. I saw it as permanent, not because anyone promised me forever, but because of how it felt. And when something feels like home, you don't question its place in your future. You just start living like it will always be there, so when it ended, it didn't feel like a resignation or a layoff or a clean goodbye. It felt like a betrayal, like the ground beneath me had cracked open and taken something with it. And not just my role or my income, but the version of me that had found light in a place I hadn't expected. The version that dared to care deeply, to trust quietly, to stay longer than necessary just to hold on to a feeling. I still remember packing my things, the way my hands trembled as I folded memories into boxes. Notebooks filled with handwriting that had once held excitement, a mug from a team event, a faded post-it note that had been stuck to my screen for months, with a joke scribbled on it that made me smile every time I saw it. Each object was heavier than it looked, not because of weight, but because of what they carry, decos of a life I thought was just beginning. No one knew what to say. They were kind, of course, polite, careful, but I could feel the distance, the discomfort, the way people turn gentle when they're afraid to say something wrong. And maybe that hurt most of all, that what was once shared and warm had turned into silence and soft nods, like it had never meant as much as it did to me. I walked out for the last time slower than I had ever walked in. My feet felt unsure, like they didn't know how to move in a world that no longer included the thing they had moved toward every morning. And I didn't cry, not at first. I just stood outside, looking back through the glass, and wondered how something that felt so alive could end so quietly, how a goodbye could echo so loudly without a single word being spoken. In the days that followed, I tried to move on, tried to rewrite my routine, wake up at new times, fill my hours with other things, but everything I did felt like I was pretending, like I had left something behind that I wasn't meant to live without. It was more than habit. It was identity. That place had become a mirror, and now that it was gone, I didn't know how to see myself without it. Sometimes, in the middle of the day, I'd catch myself reaching for my phone, ready to text someone about a moment, a memory, an idea. But I'd stop halfway through typing because there was no one on the other side of it anymore, not like there was before. The rhythm had been broken. The silence was all that answered. I tried not to be bitter. I told myself things end, that this was just life shifting again. But the truth is, I didn't just lose a job. I lost something I had fallen in love with, not a person, not a dream, but a place where my heart had once found its rhythm. A space that held my laughter, my effort, my unspoken hopes. And now that it was gone, I wasn't grieving work. I was grieving home, and nothing prepares you for that kind of empty. I didn't plan for this moment. Not really, because when something feels like home, you don't imagine having to leave it behind. But here I am, trying to find the right words for something I was never ready to let go of. I gave more than my time here. I gave my heart, in every task, in every quiet moment, in every small smile that no one else noticed. I left pieces of myself behind. This wasn't just work to me. It was the place that taught me how it feels to belong without asking, to be seen without speaking, to care without reason. And even if no one else knew how deeply I felt it all I did, I knew, and I don't regret a single second of it. Sometimes love shows up in unexpected forms, and for me it looked like early mornings, silent glances, and staying late just to feel the quiet hum of something meaningful. So no, I'm not just walking away from a title or a desk or a routine. I'm walking away from a chapter that once felt like forever, and it hurts, more than I'll ever be able to say out loud. But I'm grateful, because for a while I got to love something quietly, wholly, and with everything I had. Even if it didn't last, even if it ended in silence, even if goodbye came before I was ready, I will carry this with me, not just the memories but the way it made me feel, the way it reminded me that I had something to give. So this is me, saying goodbye to the place where my heart once lived. And maybe no one will remember what I gave, but I will, and I think that's enough.